Hey guys, my name's Christian and I'm an artist and teacher here on YouTube. And this video is going to be all about drawing heads and finding your style. Thanks, and I hope you enjoy it. It's important to understand the rules of head drawing, technical aspects of how the anatomy works, how the muscles move, how the actual forms and shapes all mesh together. But ultimately, I think it's all about the feeling and intuitive side of being able to sketch. I generally start with these head shapes, starting out with something very much akin to Andrew Loomis and his way of drawing heads, a circle, and then adding a rough shape for the cranium, and then kind of carving into it with the more refined shapes cut into thirds. For anyone that is brand new at head drawing, the head itself could be split into thirds, where the hairline down to the brow, down to the nose, and down to the chin are all generally able to be cut down into thirds of the face. And that's not always the case for every type of head shape, but it's a good rule of thumb to go based off for, just having a basis to go from. And this right here is like the base fundamental of head drawing that I really try to go based off of. It's not really something that I think requires a lot more complexity. I think a lot of the nuance and style comes in from the way people interpret these shapes and play around with them. There's some artists like Max Grecki, who I really admire, or a friend of mine named Ben Eblin, who they do a lot for playing around with the proportions and the shapes. How somebody interprets the length of a nose or the width of the eyes or something determines their style. And it's all within this base roadblock or this base structure of the rules and thirds of the head. Understanding the academic stuff mostly to me is having a very, very clear understanding of how this stuff works on a structural and logical level. And whether you're a giant fan of artists like Karl Kopinski or Eliza Ivanova or whoever, I'm a giant fan of Ahmed Aldori as well. Again, they're all operating in the structure, but they're just playing with rules in different ways. Something like somebody finding their style might be as simple as the way they throw down shapes. Like if you're going to draw a figure and you're doing these kind of flowy lines for figuring out how it all works, that's going to limit you and also benefit you in certain ways. Whereas if you're going through and doing a little bit more of a scribbly, kind of find the shapes sort of deal, that's going to also, I think that in itself is going to have its own strengths and weaknesses. And something like comic art might, like being a comic book artist, might gravitate more towards something like, throwing in shapes quickly and going back and refining, where something that is more fine art or more academic might relate to the more flowy line kind of stuff, where you're focusing on, getting everything accurately, and it's more about the process and more about the, the mastery of it, more so than purely the final result. Or if you're a concept artist, you wouldn't even, or like a concept artist and doing matte paintings and all that kind of stuff, you might be using photographs. Even if you're doing that kind of stuff, you're still kind of operating off this base logic right here of, the thirds. Going to photo bash and try to fit pieces together in kind of a collage kind of way, you're still going to be thinking about, the rule of thirds and basic light and basic proportion. You're just not as reliant on that stuff because a lot of those things might be solved for you in the photograph. But the ideas of storytelling and lighting and all that stuff are still very, very relevant. When it comes to trying to finish it, like, try to get something like this looking a little bit more finished, it's relatively straightforward. So if I am thinking of the light source coming from here, it's as simple as you possibly can make it. That's the goal of trying to understand art and trying to understand drawing. Because the more you try to add complexity like contour and anatomy and stuff, the less the abstraction of that simple rule of thirds gets away from you. And at that point where you're trying to incorporate light, shadow, storytelling, anatomy, structure, all that stuff, it is too many things to juggle, and I think that's what makes drawings fall apart. Whereas when you're focused on the, like, okay, if the light might be coming from above this box, okay, so this would for sure be the lightest part. So these two pieces would be in shadow. And understanding that, maybe there's a little bit more of a light here. So this side of the box might be a little bit darker. It's the same thing here. If you think of the head as just an oval or a circle, and you think of this as just a plane, you can very easily add some shadows to it. And it's not like you're really adding a ton of complexity or anything to it. You're just thinking of it in a very light logic sort of way. And, in the same way you would expect, you can predict where shadows cast from a tree would be. You can predict the shadows on the nose. Assuming that the nose, again, is something like a simple shape. There's a plane here. This side would be in shadow. So it can just throw in kind of a subtle thing. And your taste on how you throw down shadows, or how you, value edge, or how you value color, or any of that stuff determines how you throw down those specific colors and shapes. And that's ultimately where your style comes in. Do you work in graphite? If you're working in graphite, then you're limited by not having color, but working in graphite maybe lets you iterate a lot more. It simplifies the process so you could focus on the strengths of maybe storytelling, and then potentially coloring in post or something. I'm a giant fan of like the comic artist workflow, where you have a penciler, you have an inker, and you have a colorist, and they're all separate, distinct processes, because you let somebody kind of focus in on a singular thing that they can be very, very good at. Whereas as a single individual doing all that stuff, there are for sure people that do it well, but it overcomplicates the whole process. And I think art is all about abstracting and simplifying everything down to its base structure, fundamental stuff. And I think using these tools and using these strategies, you can quickly learn to draw pretty much anything. Move over to something that's maybe a little bit more figurative. I'm going to be drawing this from imagination, just playing around with some stuff. Something I kind of learned from some comic artists, whereas if you try to treat the torso as just a singular shape that kind of determines the rest of the body, you can kind of predict where the head will be. Okay, head there, pecs right here, which is like the chest muscle for anyone that's brand new. Add some traps, rib cage, hips, not like that, maybe just do something like that. And I will draw through shapes as well, just to make sure I'm getting the exact thing I'm trying to go for. It doesn't really matter. There aren't really any rules to how to do this stuff incorrectly or correctly. It's all about like finding what works for you and finding what ultimately like you can get yourself to enjoy doing. And as I'm going, I don't really know what this thing is going to end up looking like, but I'm just kind of going step by step and kind of reacting to that initial shape I went in the, created in the first place. And again, my own tastes and what I enjoy and what I don't like are kind of determining what I leave in and leave out. So going through and maybe fixing some anatomy, adding the serratus, maybe some abs. And I don't think it's necessarily like the best figure in the world, but it's getting there. It's getting to something that's like, okay, there's a little bit of energy there. Maybe it's a guy walking. Kind of going back to the head stuff, you can very easily manipulate those concepts and turn them into maybe something a little bit more caricatured, or a little bit something, more fun and cool, like random sort of head shape. Not going based off the kind of warping it and kind of playing around with it. You can very easily start trying to like, okay, I know that a head always has a brow and it has a nose and it has a chin. At least if we're operating off like a human standard, a human base. So going based off what I know and, kind of throwing down the lines that I like, just throwing down what I think a brow might look like for maybe like a weird alien looking character guy, caricatured thingy. And again, I'm thinking of the rule of thirds and shadow and light and all that kind of stuff, but it's all operating kind of in the back of my head. I'm not really thinking about it as I'm going. I'm trying to keep my pencil moving, or my stylus moving as much as I can, because when I start trying to draw, like, okay, that's the cranium, that's the head, okay, make sure the brow is here because that's where the thirds would be. You know, oh, I gotta make sure I gotta carve, all that kind of stuff. You know, gotta add a nose, gotta add a mouth, gotta add, and it's like it quickly like loses energy and makes it less fun. It makes it less enjoyable. And it's not really like, again, that stuff is really important to know, but it's not how people really draw. Like if you want to be a concept artist or an illustrator, a lot of the process of trying to be an illustrator or a concept artist is just throwing down shapes and just throwing down lines and kind of finding stuff as you go. Somebody that I, again, really admire is like someone like Jim Lee, who, or Carl Kapinski, and if you watch them draw, a lot of their art starts out as something like, you know, head, deltoid, maybe he has like a tabard or like a kilt on or something, adding an arm, maybe he's holding like a sword. Throwing stuff down, you know, but you're not really thinking of that stuff super academically or super tightly. The importance of doing something like figure drawing a lot and studying a lot is to forget it, is to make that stuff so intuitive that you know, kind of can just do it on command without really thinking about it. And Jim and Carl have drawn so much to where, you know, they, you know, without even thinking about it consciously, they know what a person looks like. They know what a hand looks like and a leg looks like, and they know the kind of stuff that they enjoy doing. And there's a balance you have to find between the academic study stuff and the actual art making, because if you get too far into the academic stuff, you'll get too sucked into that, so you will only be able to draw one specific thing in one specific way. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but there's you know, a goal to try and keep it as playful and enjoyable as possible, just to avoid burnout as well. You can only study for so long before it gets really, really tedious. Back to this exercise of just drawing random head shapes. And depending on what my goals are and what I'm doing, I'm just gonna like go crazy with it, see what I can do, you know, and push and pull shapes, you know, like not even going based off what I see initially and just kind of filling in the gaps from what might work. And you know, some things work, some things don't, but there's like an experimental nature of trying to, you know, have fun with your pencil. I generally try to do this like sunglasses shape for the eyes, this thing, because I think it very quickly can create a shape of, you know, kind of like where the rest of the head can kind of fall off of. For this guy, I'm gonna give him maybe a beard. Here, hair. But yeah, again, as you can see, I'm just throwing this stuff down very, very fast. And not a lot of it is looking the best, but it's just fun, you know? And trying to think of things in that way where it's, you know, again, keeping drawing fun and enjoyable. That's the way you find your style, and that's the way you learn, because you're not questioning yourself with, am I doing this right? Am I doing it, you know, in the way that, you know, X person told me to? The beauty of it is you could totally watch this video and then just be like, Christian's an idiot. You know, I'm not going to listen to anything he has to say. He's totally wrong. And that is also a totally valid way of going about this stuff. Basing everything off this, you know, fundamental gesture and idea of, you know, rule of thirds, gesture, proportion, all that stuff. That's how you get something that looks similar to a human. And the thing that's distracting if you're going to be drawing from reference or from life is the stuff like this, you know, trying to pay attention to the contour. If you're drawing an arm, focusing on the anatomy before focusing on the actual like storytelling of what you're trying to do. This base structure, you can create two very different character archetypes from it. I will draw two torsos using the same thing. So if I was going to draw a super big buff guy, maybe giant pecs, indicated rib cage, more focusing on the muscles and the abs. Messed up the head, whatever. Giant traps. And going up, whatever. Big belt thing. Whatever. And if we were to move over to this, affect the contour a little bit more. Traps to being more concave. Adding a gesture of the arms. Maybe instead of going out, maybe it's just you know, kind of putting hands on hips. Expand the hips more. And even using the same structure, you can have two different body types. You know, they might look similar in some fashion, in some way, but I think that's comes in from the nuance of how you draw the initial shape. But even from an initial shape that's literally identical, you can create two different characters from that. A little bit deeper. This a front-on shot. Wanted to take, again, the same exact shape, the same exact gesture of what we just had. You can make it a back shot. And it's just going based off little abstractions of what like the anatomy knowledge I know, using the lats and the traps and the, you know, sacrum and all that stuff to like, okay, you know, literally the same exact initial structure, but two entirely different poses. When it comes to drawing and anatomy and learning all that stuff, it's really important to find your love of it and find your, you know, intuitive side of drawing. Find out what you really like doing. For me, I like concept art, I like gesture drawing, I like figure drawing. So as a result, I'm going to tend to be somebody who's a little bit more sketchy and maybe loose, or somebody who's a hyper technical artist might focus on architectural design or something, and they're going to draw a certain way. And they're going to have their own intuitive sides that they're going to be able to incorporate. And eventually you start picking up those tips and tricks, and your hand kind of picks up the dexterity, and you start being able to move and draw really fast. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you like this video. And if you are interested in learning from me, I have a mentorship that I host on my Patreon. I charge $150 a month for 2 meetings, $100 a month for 1 meeting. In those meetings, we talk about your art. I do critiques and drawovers. We also talk about like career goals and trying to move yourself in a direction to find your style and maybe find a way of monetizing it and fitting it into a pipeline in some way. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. Like and subscribe and share. And yeah, cool. Okay, bye.